Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. Today we're doing another guide video. It's been a long time since I've done one, and if there's one thing I like doing in life more than anything, it is teaching other people things. So today we're going to start what I hope is a line of a series that you guys will enjoy, asking the question whether something is worth doing in Wizard101. So if you have any recommendations for things like that in the comments below, let me know. Today I'm going to be doing Barkingham Palace and whether Barkingham Palace is worth doing. What I hope to illustrate in these videos is the actual areas of itself, what to expect from them, what the possible rewards is it, and is it worth doing overall. So if you're interested in that, do let me know and make sure to hit the subscribe button. But without further ado, let's get into it. So I'm going to go more in depth into the gear later, but the main appeals of the Barkingham Palace dungeon are a pretty decent level 40 gear set for every wizard. It's on par with the Zeus gear, some rings that actually give damage, a decent amount of XP, and a badge. So that is the main appeals of this dungeon. It is in the 4 dungeons line of dungeons, this one specifically being the second one. But let's get into what to actually expect from here. So first off, in Barkingham Palace, you are helping out Sherlock Bones, helping to save the queen, if I remember correctly. And there's actually 3 parts to the Barkingham Palace area. There's the first one, which is the state wing. There's the second one, which is the main hall. And then the third one, which is the rooftop. Now, obviously, it depends on your team, but to give a good estimate of how long it would take to do a level 40 with maybe 4 wizards, the first area could take about 20 to 30 minutes. Second area would probably take slightly longer than that. And finally, the rooftop can be done in probably about 20 minutes as well. So overall, theoretically, with a good team of 4, you can finish this all in a little over an hour, definitely under 2 hours. But obviously, that depends on how fast you're going. I've had this first area take like 30 minutes on a max level just because of people that were super incompetent. So obviously, it depends on that. For the state wing, there is 3 parts to it. The first battle is a mob fight that has mobs that are like 1000 HP, so pretty easy. Second fight is actually the same. After you finish that fight, you'll notice that there is a wooden skeleton key boss called Billy the Cutter. Billy the Cutter actually drops some of those rings I was talking about earlier, so if you're interested in fighting him, go for it. He has about 4500 health, a fire boss, nothing too complicated. And then the final part of this dungeon is just a simple boss with about 5000 HP, nothing too crazy. I'd say that this part is the shortest and definitely the easiest by far. You can get it done way faster than the others. Realistically, none of the bosses are too difficult. Obviously, if you do the secret boss, it's a bit more difficult, but otherwise the rest of it is pretty easy. But let's move on to the next part. The main hall part of this dungeon is honestly probably the most difficult one and definitely the longest in my opinion, and definitely is a step up from state wing. This part in regards to drops doesn't actually have anything too major. I believe Chief Whip can drop some of the damage rings, so that could be an interesting thing to farm, but the main gear isn't actually dropped from this part. In regard to the actual dungeon itself, it starts off with a simple mob fight. Each mob has about 1300 health, really easy to beat, but it is the second and third part of this dungeon where things get a bit rough. In the second part, you have to fight Chief Whip. Now, Chief Whip has a cheat where whenever you actually hit him, he will cast a rebirth, and I believe he also casts a rebirth if his minions die. So the main thing that I would recommend doing for this is simply building up quite a bit and then hitting him with a massive hit and taking him out in one shot. His minion doesn't have any cheats, it's just simply him. That's really the main one. Also, sometimes when you hit him or other people, he will put a spirit armor on. Nothing too big to worry about besides that, but the rebirth can be a bit annoying, especially if you want to get the minions dealt with, because he revives them every time with rebirth. So do keep that in mind. As for the third fight, this third fight is rough because, funny enough, it also has Chief Whip in it. But this one is even more rough because the other minion he has is also a boss. So in this case, you need to stack up and try to hit both of them in one hit and kill them. You could also take out Chief Whip first and then take out the Noxious Golem, but that's realistically, in my opinion, the easiest way to do it would be to just hit them with a massive hit at once. But otherwise, that's really this part done. You're rewarded some XP, given some stuff, and boom, you can move on. Now we get to the final part of this dungeon. This is the part that gives the gear dropped from the final boss, and it's also actually, funny enough, the part that I would say is one of the easiest. It's at least easier than the main hall. I don't think it's easier than the state wing, but it's definitely easier than the main hall, and it doesn't take that long to beat. So this part is the rooftop. When you enter the dungeon, you will find a horse from Valencia. You beat her. She does have some cheats, but they are pretty easy to avoid. I would actually just treat it like it's a normal fight without worrying about the cheats too much. They're not actually that impactful to the fight, so just kill her and move on. The next fight is two bosses at around 5,000 health each. Both of them don't have any particularly special cheats. I believe they do use shields on each other though, like ice shields or something. It's nothing that's actually going to be super major. As a fire, it could be a problem, or as an ice, it could be a problem, but for other schools, you're going to be mostly fine. I would just make sure if you're one of those two schools to pack things to break the shields, or maybe pack pierces, but otherwise just treat that like it's a normal double boss fight, kill them both and move on. Next room is actually the puzzle room, and I will say I'm not going to tell you how to do this puzzle, because if you fail it, that's pathetic. It's pathetically easy. If I remember correctly, it's literally you just need to line up the things. And even as a kid, it would be incredibly easy to do. Like, it is actually that easy. If you somehow fail it, I believe they summon just like a normal minion or a boss or something. Nothing too important. And then finally, past that, you get to the main room, and the main boss being Dr. Jackal. Now, for Dr. Jackal, I would say the main cheat that you actually need to watch for is whenever you hit him, he will cheat cast a Legion Shield on him and all of his friends. Realistically, that's the most major cheat. Everything else is pretty easy. He has about 5,000 health. Honestly, just a standard run-of-the-mill boss besides that main cheat. I would recommend just blading up, fainting up, and then hitting him and killing him, and that is that. Dr. Jackal has all of the drops tied to him, and he can drop the Barkingham Palace gear. So that's realistically it for the main guide part on each of the bosses. Now let's get into the gear and the drops itself. So the actual ideal things to farm for here would be the main Barkingham Palace gear, which is dropped from Dr. Jackal. So luckily this is the shorter part of the dungeon. You can just farm the rooftop and get all the gear from him. The gear is pretty good. I would say largely it is about similar to the Zeus gear. The Barkingham Palace gear is a little bit of a step up. It also gives some universal resist rather than the 3 or so resists that are given on Zeus gear. So there is that. As for the most major drop, I would say honestly here is actually the rings drop from Chief Whip. The reason why these are good is realistically they give damage, and the first time you get damage rings otherwise are like level 56 or in the 50s. So it's pretty good to have that for about, 10 to 15 levels. So that's probably the most interesting drops and the reason why you would want to farm it. On top of that, and one of the most major things I think is worth mentioning, is the rooftop is actually a really, really good place to get wooden skeleton keys. So if you've ever been looking for wooden skeleton keys, I would actually recommend farming the rooftop. Just go through it really easily. As a max level, you can just spam, your 4-pip AoE. Not hard at all. And honestly, I think the best part about it is that they drop semi-frequently. I know that it's one of the best places, in my opinion, to get wooden skeleton keys, and definitely where I would recommend farming them. So that's a potential bonus. So finally, ultimately, is it worth doing Barkingham Palace? Because I gave you an overview of all the drops and kind of let you decide yourself, but what is my opinion on it? Well, I would say, is it worth doing it? Yes, I would recommend doing it at least once on a wizard, simply for the extra XP and potentially a good gear drop. That is probably the most basic thing, but in terms of farming it, I actually wouldn't recommend it. Now, this is actually a step away from what I've said in the past. I've said in the past that Barkingham Palace gear is worth farming for, but realistically, in retrospect, I've looked at it. For most wizards, it is barely a step up. When looking at the exact stats of it, I would actually say that death, balance, and life all have probably the most recent upgrade from the Zeus gear. These 3 are the best. They have about 10 more damage, plus they have that universal resist from this gear set, which aids them really well. Ice could also benefit from the universal resist, but damage-wise, it's not much of an upgrade. But for Fire, Storm, and Myth, the damage is realistically only barely better. It's only like 5 or 6 better, rather than that 10 to 13 for death, balance, and life. So realistically, take of that as you will. I personally think if I was a Fire especially, I wouldn't farm for it, because it's only like a 4 increase or something like that. You go from like 37 to 41. Myth is very similar. Storm, I might, and then the rest of them I probably would if I fell up to it, but that's really up to you. Again, it is only barely a step up. On top of that, at this point, you probably already have at least some of the Zeus gear, or maybe some of the Senator's gear, so you already have that. Again, I would say, just to wrap this up, the thing I'd recommend doing is just go through it all once, and then if you get a gear drop, good. If you don't, that sucks. And then if you want to farm for it, you can, but realistically, I would say it's not necessary, especially since you upgrade your gear at level 56 anyway. It's just such a short time to have a gear set that I don't know how much it's worth it. But that's really it for today. Let me know in the comments what you think, and did you like this video? Do you like this type of video idea style? I think it's pretty good because it gives a basic overview of the dungeon and also gives you some feedback on whether you should do it. I plan on doing this for more in the future. Obviously, I want to hit more obscure dungeons than say like Darkmoor, because obviously Darkmoor is worth doing, but I'll still go over it if there is enough demand for it, so let me know in the comments below what you think. But otherwise, that's it. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe again. I don't say that often, but make sure you do. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Adios.